Our next big changes are for the Project and Construction Edition. In version 2021.2, you'll be able to find the following enhancements: different modes of inventory tracking, the ability to reclassify AP bills, enhancements in the reclassification of GL account transactions, and finally, visibility restriction of project transactions. In previous versions of MYOB Advanced, handling inventory specific for projects was not an easy task. If the users want to reserve inventory for a project, they had to configure one warehouse location for each project task. Yes, it was down to the project task level. Imagine if your project was so big and it had something like 25 tasks, that is 25 warehouse locations that you have to configure. Now multiply that to the total number of projects that you have in the system. It's not sustainable and not practical to configure and maintain that much information. Also, if you have a physical inventory location in the warehouse and that location is linked to a project task, then the location cannot be used anywhere else. What a headache! In MYOB Advanced version 2021.2, there's a new feature called Project-Specific Inventory to take this nightmare away from you. When using this feature, users can just set up the tracking of quantity and cost for inventory for a project without having to do any further configuration for the warehouse. Inventory that is allocated for a project cannot be used for other projects. If the users want to use them for different projects, then they need to explicitly create a transfer order. Pretty neat, huh? Let's deep dive into the system and have a look. So before we start using this new feature, there are a few things that you need to do. Firstly, you need to go to the Enable Disable Features screen and turn on the project-specific inventory feature. After that, you need to go to the Recalculate Project Balances and select Initialize Stock. And this has to be done at the start when you have turned on a feature. After you have turned on the project-specific inventory feature, then on the project screen, you will see a new field called Inventory Tracking. The inventory tracking setting has three options. The first option is Track by Location. This option is the equivalent of the inventory tracking mode of the previous versions. That means stock items that belong to a warehouse will not be reserved. You can only reserve stock item for a project by creating a warehouse location and assign a project and project task to that location. For the second and third option, track by project quantity and track by project quantity and cost. Whenever you receive stock into inventory and specify a project and project task for those stocks, the system automatically creates virtual warehouse locations that will be used to reserve the quantity of stock for each task. You cannot issue materials that are linked to a project and project task to another project. To do so, you need to create an inventory transfer. The cost calculations of each inventory tracking mode are different as well. When you select Track by Location or Track by Project Quantity, the costs of the stock are tracked at the warehouse location level. That means if the item's inventory valuation method is average cost, then the average cost will be the same at the location level, regardless of whether the quantity belongs to any project or not. When you use the Track by Project Quantity and Cost option, then the quantity and cost of the materials that belong to a project will be tracked separately. That means if an item has a valuation method of average cost, depending on what the unit cost is when the inventory is receipted, for the same location, they might have different average costs for different projects. I encourage you to review the release notes in this area because it provides very good examples on the quantity tracking and cost calculation of the different inventory tracking modes. With the project-specific inventory feature turned on, there's some slight change in the inventory availability calculation as well. As you can see, I'm on the sales order screen, and down here you have the usual availability categories such as inventory on hand, inventory available for shipping, and inventory allocated. Now the change is that for each of these categories, there are two figures or two buckets. The first figure is actually related to the inventory line that we are viewing. So the first figure is 20. That means that I have 20 uh, I have a 20 units of this inventory ID for warehouse main that belongs to project 103. The second figure is actually the overall figure for the entire warehouse. So this figure can include inventories that belong to this project or other projects or inventories that do not belong to any project. As I mentioned earlier, if an inventory is reserved for a project and a project task, you cannot issue that inventory out for a different project or to a non-project code. To do that, you need to do an inventory transfer. And on the inventory transfer screen, you will see that there are two new fields called to project and to project task. And this is how you can transfer an inventory that belongs to a location, project and project task to a new location, project and project task. There are some changes with the way you do physical inventory as well. As an example, I have set up this scenario where I have receipted 50 units of this stock item to warehouse main, location receiving, but these 50 units do not belong to any project. At the same time, I have receipted 50 units of the same inventory ID and same warehouse and location, but this time I allocated them to project 104. So for project 104, I have set the inventory tracking mode to track by project quantity. So now I'm going to do a physical count for this inventory ID. So suppose on my physical count, um, there are a total of 100 because of my 50 units that are receipted to the warehouse without any project and another 50 that are allocated to project 104. Let's say the current physical quantity now is only 30, so that leaves a negative variance of 70 minus 70. So if the variance quantity is negative and this negative variance is larger than the number of free stock items, which are the stock items that are not allocated to any project, then on the physical inventory review, for the adjustment, you cannot release the adjustment. When you release it, it will tell you this inventory, the quantity will go negative. So what you need to do here is for these 70, you need to actually split them. So let's say 50 of them is from project X and 20 of them actually is the negative variance that comes from project 104. So now if I save it, then I can release this adjustment. And therefore I can finish the inventory count. In previous versions of MYOB Advanced, after a bill is released, users could not make any other change to the bill. Therefore, if the bill contains incorrect GL accounts, sub-accounts, there was no way to fix the error on the bill. Users had to use the reclassification functionality in the finance module to correct this. Also, once the bill is released, the amount of the bills is recorded as an actual amount on the budget line and users could not change this information. Starting in version 2021.2, users can reclassify an AP bill by changing the account, sub-account, project, project task, or cost code directly on the AP bill line. Users could also change the link between an AP bill line and a commitment line to reclassify the commitment in the project budget. So in order for you to reclassify a bill, go to the AP preferences and tick the Allow Bill Reclassification. Also, in order for you to tick this box, you must ensure that your user has the financial supervisor role or the project accountant role. So once that's done, go to the AP bill where you want to reclassify and select Action, Reclassify Bill. But before this, I just want to show you the GL batch that is linked to the bill. So before reclassification, as you can see, my journal transaction has been coded to project task number 2. I'm gonna reclassify it and change it back to another project task. And also on the GL batch, there is no original batch number because this is just the first batch of the bill. So now I'm going to reclassify the bill by select Actions, Reclassify Bill. And then you will see that the bill now has a status of under reclassification. And also the system highlights where on the bill I can reclassify. So in this case, I will change the project task to a different one. And then release again. So now when I go to financial, as you can see, the batch number has been changed. The system generated a new batch with the correct project task information and link to the original batch. Also, when I go to project transactions, I will see that the system automatically created a new project transaction for me as well because my AP bill is related to a project. So it's released into project task number 1. Also on the bill, if your bill is linked to a commitment line, which is a purchase order which was for a project, then you can also change the commitment line by reclassifying the PO line value here as well. There are some limitations with bill reclassification in which if a project has been run for allocation. So that means for this project, if I set the value run allocation on release project transactions automatically. So when the first time I release a bill and the allocation has been run automatically, then I cannot reclassify this bill. It is only when my allocation has not been run, then I can reclassify the bill, and then I can run the allocation afterwards. There are other um, there are other limitations with the AP bill reclassification functionality as well. So please refer to the release notes and have a look into those. In the previous versions, when you use the reclassification functionality in the finance module to reclassify GL transactions, the functionality was quite limited, in which if a GL transaction is linked to a project, then you cannot reclassify those transactions. In version 2021.2, this functionality has been expanded so that you can reclassify GL transactions related to projects as well. There are some limitations with this functionality. If a GL transaction is linked to a project, it cannot be reclassified if it falls into one of the following scenarios. The project transaction has been invoiced to the customer, or the transaction has been allocated, or the transaction is linked to a project commitment, or the transaction is related to a project that is not active. So I am now in the Reclassify Transaction screen in the Finance module. As usual, to reclassify transactions, you need to load the transaction into the screen first. In the Load Transactions pop-up, you will see that there are new fields that are related to projects, and that is the enhancement of this version, where you can load transactions that are project related. I'm just gonna pick a travel related transaction and load it here. And as you can see, I can now change the projects as well that were originally released for this transaction. So on my bill, I accidentally released a transaction that is not related to any project, but in fact, I need to change it to a different project. So this is how I can do it. And after that, once you are happy with all of your changes, just tick the transaction and process. And once that's done, then the system will generate a reclassifying batch number, where you will see that the amount has been moved out of the old project and moved into the correct project. You can release this transaction here. And this will also generate a project transaction as well, because this GL transaction is related to the project. When a project transaction is released, it could contain highly sensitive information such as the labor cost. Such information could accidentally be exposed to unauthorized users working with projects. Starting from version 2021.2, you can set up row-level restrictions for account groups to mitigate this risk. Users will not be able to view or enter project transactions that will debit or credit a GL account that is linked to an account group that they are restricted. A new screen has been introduced to manage this functionality, and that screen is called Project Transaction Visibility by Account Group. So I am now in the Project Transaction Visibility by Account Group screen. This screen is under the Row Level Security module, and you set up the row level security exactly how you would set up for other areas. So in this case, I have created a group, and I have selected myself as a user and tick the labor account group as well. And because the group type is a inverse, when this group is active, I will not be able to see transactions that are linked to the account group labor. I cannot also enter the transactions that are linked to the labor account group either. So let's do that in the project transaction screen. I am going to paste a transaction that I just copied before, and this transaction is linked to the labor account group. And let's see the behavior of the system. So if I enter a transaction like this, the system would tell me that I don't have access to this account group, and therefore I cannot view this transaction. It is not only in the project transaction screen, but for any screen that are related to projects that have the account group information. The users that are restricted will not be able to enter or to view the transactions that are related to the account groups.